The raise that didn't fix anything. Jordan got the email on a Tuesday. Promotion approved. New title, new salary, $11,000 more a year than last year. Jordan read it twice. Then did the thing you do when something good happens and your body doesn't believe it yet. Checked the bank app. Recalculated the monthly number. Sat there for a second waiting to feel it. Waiting for the tightness in the chest that shows up every time a bill is due to finally loosen. It didn't loosen. 6 months later, Jordan is earning more than at any point in their life, and the stress about money is exactly where it was before the raise. Maybe worse, because now there's a nicer apartment, a car payment that wasn't there before, and a quiet, specific guilt that goes something like this. I make good money now. Why does it still feel like I'm one bad month away from panic? If that sounds familiar, you are not broken, and you are not bad with money. You're running a very common, very predictable program. Income goes up. The feeling of safety does not follow it, and nobody explains why. So people default to the only explanation they've ever been handed. You must be spending wrong. You must lack discipline. You must need a better budget. That explanation is mostly wrong. What's actually happening to Jordan, and probably to you, has a name, a history, and a fix that has nothing to do with willpower. That's what this episode is for. We're going to name the mechanism, show you exactly where it hides in your own spending, and then hand you a system that stops it at the one moment it can actually be stopped. The moment the money arrives, before you ever get used to it. The treadmill you can't see. There's a concept in psychology called the hedonic treadmill. And once you see it, you can't unsee it in your own life. Back in 1971, psychologists Philip Brickman and Donald Campbell published a paper arguing that human beings have a base level of satisfaction they keep returning to, no matter what happens to their circumstances. Good things happen, satisfaction spikes, and then it fades back down to that same baseline. Bad things happen, satisfaction drops, and then, often faster than you'd expect, it climbs back up to that same baseline too. Brickman later became famous for a study most people have heard a simplified version of. Lottery winners, a year or so after their win, reporting everyday happiness levels that weren't dramatically different from a comparison group. The money was real. The lifestyle change was real. The baseline pull was just stronger than either of those things. Apply that directly to Jordan's raise. The first paycheck at the new number probably did feel great for about a week. Then the brain did what brains do. It updated. $11,000 more stopped being a windfall and became the new normal, the new floor, the thing that's simply expected now. And here's the part that matters most. Once something becomes your floor, it stops registering as a gain. It's just where you live. Which means the next dollar you need to feel any lift has to come from somewhere else entirely. This isn't a character flaw. It's closer to how your eyes adjust to a dark room. The adjustment is automatic, it's fast, and it happens completely outside your conscious control. Nobody sits down and decides to stop appreciating their raise. The baseline just moves, quietly, in the background, usually within a matter of weeks. So, if the treadmill resets your feeling of enough every time your income moves, the obvious next question is, enough compared to what? And that's where the story gets more interesting than simple adaptation. Why comparison beats math. In 1974, an economist named Richard Easterlin published a paper asking a deceptively simple question. Does economic growth actually make people happier? He looked at data across countries and over time and found something that shouldn't be possible if income and happiness move together in any straightforward way. Within a given country, at a given moment, richer people reported being happier than poorer people. That part makes intuitive sense. But when he looked at whole countries over long stretches of time, as average income rose significantly, average happiness didn't rise with it, not by much, and sometimes not at all. This became known as the Easterlin paradox, And the resolution economists eventually converged on is almost uncomfortably simple. What predicts happiness isn't your income in absolute terms. It's your income relative to the people around you. Being richer than your neighbor feels good. Everyone getting richer together, neighbor included, doesn't move the needle much at all. Because the comparison that your brain actually runs is never, how much do I have? It's how much do I have compared to them. Think about what that means for Jordan. In absolute terms, Jordan is unambiguously doing better than 5 years ago. More income, more savings potential, more options on paper. But Jordan isn't measuring against 5 years ago Jordan. Jordan is measuring against whoever is sitting in the next cubicle. Whoever posted a vacation photo this week. Whoever just mentioned a mortgage on a place twice the size of Jordan's apartment. The math says progress. The comparison says treading water. This is why just make more money was never going to be a complete fix for Jordan or for you. If satisfaction is driven by relative position and your reference point drifts along with your income, then income alone can chase that target forever and never actually catch it, which raises an uncomfortable question. If the goalpost moves on its own, who's moving it, and can that be interrupted on purpose? That's exactly where we're headed next. Your peer group upgraded without asking you. Here's the mechanism nobody warns you about when you get promoted. Your peer group upgrades right along with your title, often before you've had a chance to notice it happen. Jordan's old friend group, back when Jordan was earning entry-level money, was other people making entry-level money. Nobody had a mortgage. Splitting a pizza 4 ways was normal. Nobody was quietly self-conscious about their car. Fast forward to the promotion. Jordan's new work circle includes people who've been in the industry a decade longer, who bought property when it was still affordable, whose idea of a normal weekend costs more than Jordan's old rent. Nobody announced a new comparison group. It just happened by proximity, the way it always does. You spend your days around the people you now work with, sit in meetings with, grab lunch with, and your brain quietly starts using them as the measuring stick instead of the friends you had 2 jobs ago. This is reference group creep, and it's sneaky because it feels like nothing changed except who you happen to be around. But who you happen to be around is doing enormous psychological work. Doubling your income, compared to your college years, should feel like an obvious win. It often doesn't, because you've stopped comparing yourself to college you. You're comparing yourself to the senior colleague with 15 more years of compounding behind them, and against that yardstick, you're behind. No matter what the raise letter said, notice what this does to the enough number in your head. It's not a fixed target you can hit and relax. It's tethered to whoever is nearest to you, and as you climb, the people nearest to you tend to be further ahead, not because you're failing, but because that's simply who occupies those rooms. Jordan didn't get worse at managing money. Jordan got moved into a room with a taller ceiling and started measuring against the ceiling instead of the floor they climbed up from. Once you can name that shift, you can also decide not to let it run unexamined. But first, there's a second mechanism working alongside it, one that shows up not in who you compare yourself to, but in what you've quietly started calling essential. When luxury quietly becomes necessity, there's a specific kind of spending decision that almost never gets audited, and it's the one that does the most damage. It's not the single big purchase, the boat or the watch, the thing you'd actually stop and think twice about. It's the slow reclassification of upgrades from nice to have into obviously necessary, one small decision at a time. After the raise, Jordan moved to a bigger apartment. Reasonable, right? More income should mean more space. Then came a nicer car, because commuting to the new office in the old one felt slightly embarrassing around new colleagues. Then take out a few more nights a week, because after longer hours, cooking felt like one more task Jordan didn't have the bandwidth for. Each of these decisions, taken alone, sounds completely defensible. Nobody sat Jordan down and said, "Justify this." Jordan didn't need to, because each one arrived with its own built-in story. That's exactly the trap. Individually justified purchases never get evaluated as a system, because there's no single moment where you're forced to look at the whole picture. You just move through a string of small, reasonable-sounding yeses, and 18 months later, the extra income that was supposed to build a safety net has been fully absorbed by a lifestyle that quietly relabeled every upgrade as something Jordan has to have now. The bigger apartment isn't inherently a mistake. The better car isn't inherently a mistake. The problem is that none of it was ever added up and looked at side by side against what Jordan actually said mattered. Back before the raise arrived, the spending crept in one small, defensible decision at a time, and crept in exactly because no single decision felt big enough to question. This is worth sitting with for a second, because it explains something confusing. Why the guilt Jordan feels doesn't attach to any one purchase. There's no smoking gun, no single reckless splurge to point to and say, "That's the problem." The problem is the sum of a dozen small, individually reasonable decisions that were never audited together. And that pattern has a name too, one borrowed from a completely different field. Money obeys Parkinson's law too. In 1955, a writer named Cyril Northcote Parkinson published an essay in The Economist, making an observation about bureaucracy that turned out to be one of the most quoted lines in management thinking. Work expands to fill the time available for its completion. Give a task an hour, it takes an hour. Give the same task a week, somehow it takes a week. Financial writers later borrowed that logic and pointed it at money. And while it's worth being honest that this specific extension is a popular adaptation rather than something Parkinson himself studied, the pattern holds up remarkably well in practice. Expenses expand to consume the income available to spend them, almost regardless of how much that income is. Give yourself more room, and something will expand to fill it, usually without a deliberate decision being made anywhere in the process. This is exactly what happened to Jordan, and it's exactly what Parkinson's logic predicts will happen to almost anyone without a specific intervention. The raise created more room. Nothing forced that room to be filled. There was no rule requiring the bigger apartment or the takeout habit. But room that exists tends to get used, the same way a closet that's empty for 6 months somehow fills up with things you don't remember buying. Here's why this matters more than it sounds like it should. It means a raise is structurally self-erasing unless something specifically interrupts it. Not because you're careless, but because the absence of a rule is itself a kind of rule, one that defaults to spend what's available. Waiting for willpower to notice the room and choose not to fill it is betting against a very consistent pattern of human behavior. It's not a fair bet. So, if expansion happens by default, the only real fix is to remove the room before it can be filled, which sounds abstract until you actually calculate what filling that room costs you, not just this year, but over the years the money would otherwise have had to grow. The version of you who banked it instead. Let's run the numbers, not with disposable statistics, just with a simple thought experiment anyone can hold in their head. Picture two versions of Jordan splitting off at the moment of that promotion. Version 1 is the Jordan we've been following, the one who let the extra $11,000 a year get absorbed into rent, car, and takeout as it arrived. Version 2 takes the exact same raise, but redirects a fixed slice of every future increase into an investment account the moment it shows up, before it ever touches everyday spending. 10 years out, the difference between these two Jordans isn't just the sum of money set aside. It's that sum, plus every year of growth it would have compounded, plus every future raise. Version 2 also captured a slice of, compounding on top of the first slice, and the one after that stacking on both. The gap between these two people isn't linear. It's closer to a snowball, because money invested early doesn't just sit there. It keeps generating more of itself, year over year, long after the original decision was made. This is the real cost of lifestyle creep, and it's almost never counted because it's invisible in the moment. Nobody feels the opportunity cost of a bigger apartment the day they sign the lease. You feel the apartment, you don't feel the decade of compounding you quietly opted out of. That invisibility is exactly what makes creep so much more expensive than any one purchase looks like it should be. It's not the $400 a month. It's the $400 a month multiplied by every year it didn't get to grow. None of this is an argument for austerity, for never enjoying the raise you worked for. It's an argument for knowing what the trade actually costs before you make it by default, instead of making it accidentally, one small yes at a time, the way Jordan did. And to make better trades purpose, it helps to first recognize which specific pattern of creep you're most prone to, because it isn't the same for everyone. 3 ways creep sneaks in. Lifestyle creep doesn't wear one costume. It tends to show up in a handful of recognizable shapes, and most people can spot themselves in at least one. The first is promotion creep, which is exactly what happened to Jordan. A raise or a new title triggers an almost immediate upgrade cycle. New apartment, new car, new wardrobe for the new role, often within the first few months, before the new income has even had time to prove itself stable. The second is feast and famine creep, and this one hits freelancers and commission-based earners especially hard. A great month comes in, client work is flowing, the number in the account looks bigger than it's ever looked, and spending quietly recalibrates to that peak as if it's the new normal baseline, rather than the best month in a range that will inevitably include worse ones. The correction comes later, painfully, when a slow month arrives and the baseline hasn't adjusted back down with it. The third is relationship merge creep, which is quieter and easier to miss because it happens gradually, as a shared life. 2 individual incomes combine into one household, and instead of each partner's prior spending habits averaging out, the combined income ends up normalizing both people's individual upgrades simultaneously. Her nicer car, plus his nicer apartment, plus both of their individual, I've earned this purchases now happening under one roof, funded by 2 incomes that each partner privately still thinks of as covering only their own habits. You might see yourself clearly in one of these, or catch a little of all 3. That's fine. The goal here isn't a diagnosis, it's recognition. Because once you know exactly which door the creep is walking through in your life, you know exactly where to put the lock. And that's what the next part of this is actually about. The counter system, raise capture. Here's the idea this entire episode has been building toward. And it's deliberately not a discipline's strategy, because discipline is exactly the thing that's already lost this fight for most people, over and over. The idea is called raise capture, and it works like this. The moment any income increase happens, a raise, a bonus, a new client, a rate increase, a fixed percentage of that specific increase is automatically redirected into savings or investing before it ever lands in the account you spend from. Not a fixed percentage of your whole income. That's a different conversation. A fixed percentage of the increase specifically. The new marginal dollars that didn't exist in your budget before. If Jordan's raise is $11,000 a year, and the capture rate is 50%, then $5,500 of that gets automatically redirected before Jordan ever sees a bigger number in checking. The other $5,500 is genuinely guilt-free spendable because it was decided on purpose, not left to drift. Why does this work when willpower repeatedly hasn't? Because it removes the moment of decision entirely. Willpower requires you to notice extra money sitting in an account and consciously choose not to spend it every single time, indefinitely, against a brain that's specifically wired to adapt to whatever's available. Automation doesn't ask you to resist anything because the money is gone from view before the adaptation process ever gets a chance to start. You can't creep towards spending money you never saw. This single mechanical change directly interrupts every pattern we've covered. The hedonic treadmill can't reset your baseline to income you never experienced as spendable. Reference group comparison loses some of its pull when your visible number doesn't move as fast as your actual number. And Parkinson's law has no room to expand into, because the room was captured before it existed as room. One rule applied at one moment, doing the work that an entire library of willpower advice has never reliably done for anyone. Friction as a design tool. Raise capture handles the money you don't see. But there's still the money you do see, the deliberately spendable portion, and that part benefits from a different kind of tool. Friction, added on purpose. This isn't about making all spending harder. That would just trade one form of misery for another. It's about making new, reflexive upgrades slightly harder to execute on autopilot, so that spending has to pass through a moment of actual intention instead of happening by default. A few concrete versions of this. Keep the deliberately spendable portion of a raise in a separate account from everyday checking, one specifically labeled for upgrades. So every purchase from it requires an active transfer instead of a frictionless tap. Remove saved payment methods from shopping apps and browsers. So checkout requires typing in a card number, a 15-second delay that turns out to matter enormously for impulse purchases. And put a simple, fixed rule in place. Something like a 48-hour wait on any purchase above a threshold. You set for yourself. No exceptions, no talking yourself out of the wait once it's set. None of this eliminates spending, and that's not the goal. Jordan doesn't need to stop enjoying the new income. Jordan needs the spending to be something that was decided, not something that simply happened because it was the path of least resistance. Friction doesn't block a purchase you actually want. It just guarantees you're awake for the decision, instead of sleepwalking into it, the way the bigger apartment and the extra takeout nights arrived. One unexamined yes after another. The goal of both raise capture and friction is the same. Put a small, deliberate obstacle between the moment money exists and the moment it disappears into a new baseline, so that what gets spent on purpose. Which leads to the actual question underneath all of this, one that has nothing to do with mechanics and everything to do with what any of this is for in the first place. Redefining enough. There's a book from the mid-90s, Your Money or Your Life, written by Vicki Robin and Joe Dominguez, that made an argument worth sitting with here. Money isn't just currency, it's a stand-in for life energy, the hours of your one life that were traded to earn it. Their core question wasn't, how do I spend less? It was, does this purchase actually return life satisfaction proportional to the life energy it cost? That reframe matters enormously for everything we've covered. This episode isn't an argument for austerity, for treating every upgrade as suspicious, for feeling guilty about the nicer apartment or the new car. Some upgrades are genuinely, measurably worth it. They add real satisfaction, real quality of life, real time back in ways that are worth the trade. The problem was never spending more as income rises. The problem is spending more by default, upgrade after upgrade arriving, because it was available and expected, never because anyone actually examined whether it earned its place. Jordan's bigger apartment might genuinely be worth it. More space, less roommate friction, a real improvement in daily life. Jordan's habit of ordering takeout 4 nights a week might not be, might just be decision fatigue, wearing the costume of a reward. The only way to tell the difference is to actually ask the question, deliberately, instead of letting the hedonic treadmill and the peer comparison and Parkinson's law answer it by default, which is what happens to anyone who never pauses to ask. Enough, in other words, isn't a number. It's a decision you make on purpose, checked against what actually adds to your life, instead of a moving target set by whoever's compensation you happened to overhear this month. Which brings us to the one thing that actually changes any of this, starting the very next time it applies to you. The challenge. Decide before the money arrives. So here's the actual challenge. And it's small enough to do this week if the situation ever applies, and specific enough that there's no ambiguity about what to do. The next time your income rises in any amount from any source, a raise, a bonus, a new client, a rate increase, decide the capture percentage before the money arrives, not after you've seen the bigger number sit in your account for a month, not after the new baseline has already started to feel normal, before. Pick a number now. In the calm, unpressured moment of listening to this, when there's no new deposit tempting you one way or another, 50% captured is a strong, ambitious default if you can manage it. 30% still moves the needle meaningfully if that's more realistic for where you are. The exact number matters less than the fact that it's decided in advance, on purpose, by you instead of being decided by default, by the treadmill, by Parkinson's law, by whichever coworker's new car happened to catch your eye this month. Remember where we started. Jordan got the raise, felt the momentary lift, and then watched it dissolve into a new baseline within months. Same stress, same guilt, just at a higher number. That outcome wasn't inevitable, and it wasn't a character flaw. It was simply what happens by default when nobody interrupts the pattern on purpose. The goal was never to earn enough to make the pressure disappear on its own. Income was never going to do that alone, no matter how high it climbed. The goal is to stop letting your baseline move without your permission. You don't need more income to feel this shift. You need one rule set before the next dollar arrives. Decide it now, write it down somewhere you'll actually see it, and the next time a raise lands, you'll already know exactly what happens to it before it ever gets the chance to quietly become the new normal.